Let's talk about locations where you can photograph fairies. In the part of Iowa where I live, there aren't a lot of wooded areas or overgrowth areas, as it's mostly corn and soybean fields. So to photograph, I've had to hunt for places close by when I don't have the opportunity to travel anywhere. Now with that said, though traveling to different locations to photograph fairies is a lot of fun, it's also a good idea to find some place close to home where you can photograph somewhat regularly as your schedule allows. My own photographing experiences have shown me that when I go to a location often, I tend to get more fairy photos and clearer fairy photos each and every time I visit for a shoot. As the fairies become accustomed to me being there and realize that I'm not out to harm them or do damage to their surroundings, they become less shy and more curious about me, thus coming out into the open more, where I can oftentimes photograph more than just a tiny head peeking out from behind a big leaf. I have or had two such local trails. The first I call the Mousehole Trail, named after the Mousehole Railroad Bridge you see on the screen. This bridge was torn down in 2016, but since the entrance of this short trail was close to the bridge, I used the name Mousehole Trail. A unique name like this, I find, helps to make sure I know exactly where I've taken my photos, and I can just use the initials MH for Mousehole and the date in my files. This is much shorter than using the town name of Melbourne. So the Mousehole Trail, the entrance of which you see on the screen right now, is only a 5-minute walk from my home, and I've photographed there off and on for the last 2 years. Unfortunately, someone purchased the property and has now, as of May 2019, posted no trespassing signs, so my time of photographing fairies on this trail is over. I am thankful for the photographs I have of the fairies from this location, especially since, after the first photo shoot here, I didn't think it would be a good place to go, as I found very few clear photos of the fairies living there. However, I gave this location a second chance and was rewarded with some amazing photos. As stated before, the more I visited this trail for photo shoots, the more fairy photos I was gifted with. The second trail is about 10 minutes from my home by car in the small town of Rhodes, Iowa. I call this trail the Mystic Trail, but as you can see from the sign in this picture, it's actually called the Heart of Iowa Nature Trail, and it's one of many in Iowa. The Mystic Trail here, and I'll still keep calling it that, is quite long. It's about 2.5 miles, I think, and on the other end from this one is a tourist attraction called the Hoy Bridge. I'll show you that. Right there's it's an old railroad bridge. Big thing here in Iowa. So I've photographed in the first 3/4 of a mile of this trail, off and on, since 2016. It is one of the most amazing places for fairy photos, and I've never failed to be gifted with some super unique and clear images, even from the first photo shoot in this location. So I've covered a bit about photographing in a rural area, but what if you live in a city? I haven't lived in a city for nearly 30 years, and when I did, I was not photographing fairies at that time, but I have no doubt that there are fairies who very much enjoy a busy city life. So one of the first places I would suggest going is to a botanical garden if your city has one. Des Moines, Iowa is only 40 minutes away from me, and they do have a botanical garden. They're open year-round and only closing on major holidays, and they very much encourage taking photos. And as you can see, this is just a small portion. Some of this garden is inside, some of it's outside, so even on rainy days, if you had nothing else to do, you could visit the botanical garden and take photographs. Now, I don't know about all locations, whether they encourage photo taking or not, but you can look online to see what their policies are and go that route. So other possible locations would be like a wooded cemetery, a city park that has some wooded area, or perhaps biking and jogging paths. And then there's zoos. Some zoos, like the Omaha Henry Dorley Zoo, offer natural habitat walkthroughs, like the one on the screen here, with live plants. So this could be a possibility as well. And I guess if all else fails, find out where the closest state park is to you. And then you would have plenty of area for photographing. Keep in mind that all of these suggestions would work for anyone who lives rurally too, but obviously there would be more travel involved. Kind of like for me going 40 minutes to Des Moines to the botanical gardens. What I have shown and suggested to you here so far are locations that are overgrown or wooded, as I have found them to be some of the best places to photograph fairies. Mainly, I think, because there are so many different opportunities for the fairies in a wooded area. But don't be afraid to try other places that strike you as possible too. There is no strict rule that says fairies have to live in the woods. There are no rights or wrongs here. Just photograph where you feel the urge to photograph. You'll either find fairies in your photos or you won't. But even if you don't on the first try in a certain location, don't just write that location off. Try it at least 1 or 2 more times if you can. Sometimes the fairies can be shy, as they were for me on the Mousehole Trail. But if they see you more than once and they realize you mean them no harm, they just might come out to have their photos taken. The following photos are a few of the other places that I have photographed to give you even more ideas about where you could go to photograph fairies. As in this first photo, old wooden cemeteries are really awesome. This photo is from an out-of-the-way old cemetery called Ball Cemetery. To date, this is one of the best photographs, or at least one of my favorites, that I've taken. I believe the little fellow sleeping in this picture is some kind of gnome species, but I don't know for sure. I really haven't had the opportunity to communicate with him yet. Now here, let me enlarge, and you see his pointed head. You can see his sleeping eye, nose, bushy eyebrows, other sleeping eye, and he's spread-eagled here. So anyway, don't discount any, possible location, because you never know what you're going to find. And, I also took pictures of the woods and found other fairies in there as well, and then just thought, well, I'll take a picture of this big pile of wood. And there he was. I did not see him when I took the photo, but I sure did when I got home. There are also times you might just want to stop the car, if it's safe to do, and take a picture of an area alongside a road. I did this on a small stretch between the Mystic Trail and a cemetery that is right up the road from the trail, and I discovered a woman. I have learned that her name is Esmeralda, and she is now a part of the We Folk Toracles Oracle deck that's on the creations page of this website. But if you can see her right here, she has kind of like a graduation hat, long nose. She's got glasses across her nose, kind of like a graduation gown or a professor's gown. So you never know what you're going to find, even in long grass. You might also consider photographing along the riverbank, especially if there's old gnarled trees. It seems to be a wonderful place to photograph fairies. And I've found in locations like this, oftentimes you don't recognize what those fairies are. In other words, are they elves? Are they gnomes? It's usually a species that I'm unfamiliar with. And I'll show you quickly here. This guy is actually sleeping. He has his eyes closed. He's got kind of almost like Native American paint on his cheeks, his nose, fat little belly. I call him a tree being because he seems as though he is connected to that tree. And then also, you don't want to discount the water. In this case, there was a little one crawling out of the water. Almost looks like a teddy bear. Not sure what it is. And there were probably other ones in this photograph, but those are the two that I remember well. And I do have another picture that has all of them marked, but we will cover that later. If you happen to be traveling somewhere that has bluffs, such as this one in Arkansas, you might actually discover some interesting fairies here as well. Bluffs seem to make wonderful homes for some fairies, so you never know who you're going to find here. And if I enlarge this photo, I have to scroll over. One of the ones that stood out for me was right here. It looks like, well, you can see a nose and eyes, hair, kind of a hood made out of the pine needles here. And you can see the hand coming up. He's ducking his head down, keeping himself a little bit hidden as we drive by and I take the photograph. So he's actually wearing like a pine needle coat, the way that it looks. And there's also a more cartoonish looking little guy right here. He's in profile. He's wearing a little hat, has a little tuft of red hair here, shoulder. Here's the face, an eye, nose. And I know it's difficult to see it on the screen here. There are probably many more in this photograph. Sometimes I find, even after I've gone through a photograph one time, I will maybe wait a week and go through it again, because sometimes I find more in a photo, and depends on your frame of mind at the time you're going through it, if you've had a hard day and your eyes are tired, and so on. So going through a photo a second time is never ever a bad thing. Burial mound locations are wonderful too. At Effigy Mounds in Harpers Ferry, Iowa, there are 3 tiers that you can walk to. Each tier is a bit higher up than the one before it. Each tier has certain burial mounds, and I believe on the first tier they're smaller, second tier they're higher, third tier I believe they're in shapes of animals. And if you could fly over, you could see those shapes. So in this one, here are a couple of burial mounds here. And when I zoom in on this particular photo, I found this little guy here that I call a leprechaun. He's actually like leaning against this tree. Now you might not be able to see his hat as clearly as I can, or his face and his eye, but his shoes and his sleeve of his shirt really stand out here. So here's this leprechaun, and as you can see, the base of this tree is down here and he's way up here. So when you're going through your photos, you know, you may discover one's up in the air here too. Also at Effigy Mounds, there are trails that lead to each tier that look like this. So it's not just the burial mounds, you also have wooded, a lot of wooded area. Absolutely beautiful. This particular one, in this photo, I almost missed this little guy. Here he is. He's a gnome that has turned himself into kind of a cartoonish gnome, trying to blend in with the greens of the leaves to hide from me. I'm sure they, you know, deal with a lot of humans walking on the trails through Effigy Mounds. It's a very, very big tourist attraction. So he was trying to hide, and like I said, I almost missed him in my photo. I had gone through the photo a second time and went, wow, how did I ever miss him? He stands out like a sore thumb. Last but certainly not least are rocky areas like you see in this picture. These are great places for fairies to live, as there's caves created by these rocks that are perfect for getting out of the elements whenever necessary. Or maybe it's a vacation spot for them, close to the water, away from the forest. It's hard to say. Anyway, oftentimes you'll find fairies in locations like this as well. And again, being energy beings, they can kind of be and whatever they would like to be, or turn into whatever they would like to in some cases. Now if I zoom in on this photograph, we'll see like this little rock guy here. I'll zoom up a little bit more. He's got his facial features and he's an interesting little guy. And if I come down here a little ways, we have kind of a cartoonish little rock person here. And of course, they're not all rock people. Here's this guy. He's got himself his little triangular hat squished up against the rock. You can see his ear. His eye is clear. His nose is clear. So don't disregard anything, you know, that you see in a photograph. If you can see it, go ahead and save it. Go back and look at it later and see if you still feel that it is a fairy and that other people would be able to see it. So yeah, don't discount a location just because it doesn't have a lot of vegetation. As you can see, there are many places where you can photograph fairies. What I've shared here is just the tip of the iceberg. So don't be afraid to go out and explore a bit and see what kind of fairies you can discover for yourself. Now, to finish off this lesson, I want to cover what I call a basic consideration. One of my biggest concerns when deciding to share my fairy photos and others how to photograph them was how I could keep these fairies safe. And I know this may seem a strange statement, but as humans, we don't have the best track record when it comes to respecting the space and privacy of beings or creatures that are different than we are. That's why we have so many species that are nearly extinct. So the basic consideration is to take the path of least danger to the fairies. No matter where you are photographing, try to find a path and stay on it. On a nature trail, there's more than enough woods on the right and left side of the path to take photos, so there's no reason to go tromping through the woods to take your photos. In other places, if there's no designated path, you might want to announce yourself and give the fairies a heads up that you will be walking, say, along the riverbank or across the rocks. This assures that you don't disturb the homes of the fairies. Remember, there are also many fairy children out there. This means babies, toddlers, and older children, all of whom I have photographed myself. If the fairies see that you have a healthy respect for them, you'll probably find that they are more likely to allow you to photograph them. So please, keep this basic consideration in mind always. All right, that's it for this lesson. Next up, taking pictures.